Fog rolled across the fields near Arracourt, France, at 6:15 on the morning of September 20th, 1944, and Major Charles Carpenter crouched beside his Piper L-4 Grasshopper, unable to see 30 feet in any direction, knowing German Panther tanks were somewhere out there advancing on trapped American positions he couldn't yet find. 32 years old, a high school history teacher from Moline, Illinois, less than 3 years removed from teaching teenagers about wars instead of flying through them. 6 bazooka launchers hung bolted to his wings that morning, a modification nobody in the Army Air Forces had ever approved, on an aircraft that weighed barely more than a family car. The Piper L-4 was never built for any of this. 765 pounds empty, a 65-horsepower engine, fabric-covered wings meant for artillery spotting at a safe, sensible altitude, not for diving on German armor, with rockets bolted where a spotter's binoculars were supposed to go. 2 days earlier, the German 5th Panzer Army had thrown 262 tanks and assault guns at Combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division, and Carpenter had spent 3 straight months watching American tank crews burn alive from the safety of altitude, circling with nothing but a radio, while Sherman after Sherman went up in flame below him. German Panthers could punch through Sherman armor at 1,200 yards. American 75mm guns needed to close inside 300 to even try. Most tank crews never got the chance. He'd watched 2 other pilots strap bazookas to their own cubs a few weeks earlier and destroy a pair of German trucks. Proof of concept, in Carpenter's mind, that the idea worked even if the ambition behind it had been small. He wanted tanks. He found an ordnance tech and a crew chief willing to help him bolt 3 M9 launchers to each wing strut, wired to toggle switches in the cockpit, fire individually or all at once. The crew chief painted Rosie the Rocketer across the cowling. Every other pilot on the field called it something closer to suicide. If you want to see whether a history teacher's bazooka-armed Piper Cub could actually kill a German tank, hit that like button right now. Subscribe, because what happens over the next 6 hours is genuinely hard to believe. Back to Carpenter. He climbed alone that morning with no observer and no radio operator. Just himself, and 18 rockets in an aircraft already 90 pounds over its rated payload. The fog didn't lift until nearly 10, and even then, it broke apart in patches rather than clearing outright. Fields, tree lines, a canal reflecting flat gray sky, glimpses of ground that vanished again before Carpenter could commit to anything. He tested the aircraft's handling once the launchers had settled into their mounts. The extra drag and weight made the Grasshopper sluggish in a way it had never been on a routine spotting flight. Heavier, angrier, a plane that fought him slightly on every bank. By 11 that morning, he'd spotted them. 6 or 7 Panthers, armored cars, infantry on foot, advancing southwest 3 miles northeast of Arracourt, some of them still half hidden in the tree line. He checked his fuel, enough for 1 committed attack and a reserve to get home. The bazookas sat angled 20 degrees upward on the struts, which meant Carpenter couldn't simply aim the weapon. He had to aim the entire aircraft, nose the Grasshopper into a dive steep enough to point the tubes at the ground, hold that dive to something close to 100 meters, fire, and pull out before German infantry finished reacting to the small yellow airplane suddenly screaming down at them. He put the sun at his back, pushed the nose over into a 35-degree dive, and watched the lead Panther grow from a shape to a machine, with visible turret markings in the space of a few seconds. At 100 meters, he pressed the switch. The rocket left the tube in a crack of exhaust flame that missed the fabric wing by inches, and Carpenter hauled back on the stick without waiting to see it land. The overloaded Grasshopper clawing for altitude far too slowly, while German infantry below opened up with everything they had. Rounds cracked past the cockpit. 1 punched clean through the left wing fabric. He kept climbing anyway, leveled off, looked back. Smoke pouring from the Panther's engine deck. Not destroyed, but stopped cold. And every German soldier in that column, now staring up at the sky instead of ignoring it. He landed at Lonville just before noon, with bullet holes in the wing and tail, and a scorched but intact launcher tube. The design had worked, barely, channeling the exhaust away from the fabric instead of burning through it. Reload took 14 minutes. He was back in the air by 12:19, with 12 rockets left, and by 12:30 he'd found a second, larger formation, 8 Panthers this time, moving with half-tracks along a tree line, probably a different brigade entirely trying to flank the American position from another direction. Artillery would take too long to range in. Carpenter dove again. The Germans were ready for him this time. Machine gun fire heavier and better aimed. Something striking the engine cowling with a metallic clang that made the Continental engine cough once before it kept running. He hit the lead tank anyway, immobilized, not destroyed, and on his second pass of that sortie, put a rocket through a second Panther's side armor at an angle steep enough to cook off its own ammunition storage from the inside. That one burned, crew bailing out through smoking hatches. 2 tanks stopped in 2 sorties, 10 rockets left, and a tail section now torn badly enough that the rudder had gone mushy and slow to answer. He was turning for home with damaged control surfaces and a dropping fuel gauge when the radio crackled with something that erased any thought of landing. A 20-man waterpoint support crew from the 4th Armored had been bypassed and trapped 3 miles east of Arracourt. No heavy weapons. 4 Panthers closing on their position. Artillery unable to fire without hitting American troops. Air support committed elsewhere. Any assistance, the transmission said. Immediate. Carpenter had 10 rockets, a damaged rudder, and an engine running slightly hot from whatever had hit the cowling. The sensible decision was to land, assess the damage, and come back later in a working aircraft. 20 men didn't have later. He turned east and found the water point position exactly where the radio said it would be. 5 trucks in a clearing, soldiers sheltering behind them, and 4 Panthers advancing from 800 yards out with infantry alongside. The moment Carpenter's Grasshopper came into view, every one of those 4 tanks stopped moving, and every German soldier went to ground in a defensive crouch, machine guns already swinging skyward. They weren't surprised anymore. They were waiting for him specifically, and this would not be the same kind of attack as his first 2 passes that morning. He climbed just outside effective small arms range, armed everything he had left, and understood with total clarity that he could circle uselessly while 20 Americans died, or dive into a coordinated ambush and probably not survive it. He dove anyway, 38 degrees nose down, the damaged rudder fighting him the entire way. Infantry opening fire at 200 meters instead of waiting for 100 the way they had that morning. Tracers converged on his flight path before he'd even fired. He loosed 2 rockets at 150 meters and hauled back on a stick that answered late and mushy, the frayed elevator cable finally giving out partway through the pull, the nose coming up far slower than it should have, while rifle fire tore through fabric and pinged off metal the entire time he crossed directly over the German position at under 400 feet. Both rockets landed close to the lead Panther without a clean kill. Dirt and debris, the tank still moving, damage uncertain. Carpenter leveled off with an engine running rough, the oil temperature gauge buried in the red, fuel down to under 6 gallons, not enough to reach base if he lingered much longer over the fight. 8 rockets left, 3 Panthers still advancing on 20 men who had nothing heavier than rifles to shoot back with, and the Germans below had stopped simply defending. They were coordinating now, tracking his attack pattern, waiting for the dive they knew was coming. So Carpenter refused to give them one. He dropped to 200 feet, below where the Germans had aimed their weapons, expecting another high dive, and came in low along a tree line from the west instead, using the terrain itself as cover, the way no observation pilot was ever trained to. At 600 yards from the Panthers, he popped up to 300 feet and nosed over into the steepest dive yet, 40 degrees, arming 2 launchers as German infantry scrambled to reorient their weapons a full second too late. Both rockets hit simultaneously, one into the turret ring, one through the thinner top armor of the engine deck. That Panther didn't stop. It burned, hatches flying open, crew bailing out with their uniforms already smoking. Carpenter didn't pull up and circle to safety the way doctrine and every ounce of common sense demanded. He stayed at 300 feet and turned immediately for the second tank, while German gun crews were still reorienting from a threat that hadn't come from the direction they'd prepared for. 2 more rockets, fired through machine gun fire that tore the fabric clean off the forward lift strut on his left wing. And the second Panther's turret lifted 6 inches off its ring and settled crooked as ammunition cooked off inside. 2 tanks burning in under 2 minutes. The remaining pair of Panthers had stopped advancing entirely. Their infantry was scattering, some retreating outright, having just watched 2 of their own vehicles die in front of them in less time than it took to reload a rifle. Carpenter had 6 rockets left, and an engine making sounds no Continental engine was built to make. Metal grinding somewhere in the cowling, oil smoke starting to trail behind him, the temperature gauge pegged past its own maximum reading. 1 more attack run, if the engine held that long at all. He put a single rocket into the 3rd Panther's track assembly, immobilizing it without destroying it, the crew still alive inside, and the turret still traversing toward the trapped Americans. The 4th Panther sat 350 yards from the waterpoint trucks, close enough that Carpenter could see individual soldiers who'd stopped firing entirely, conserving what little ammunition they had left, while a German main gun swung toward the largest vehicle in their small perimeter. The engine seized for 2 full seconds as Carpenter turned in for his last pass. Propeller stopped dead, nothing but wind through torn fabric, before catching again, grinding, clearly dying but not dead yet. He armed his last 3 rockets on the right wing, committed to firing them all in a single simultaneous burst, with no second attempt possible, and dropped to 150 feet, the lowest dive of the entire day. The Panther's commander spotted him from the turret hatch, just as Carpenter fired everything at once. The recoil nearly rolled the aircraft over. All 3 rockets hit within 2 seconds of each other. Turret side, upper hull, track assembly, and the Panther's own ammunition storage went up from the inside, lifting the entire vehicle off the ground before the hull split open. 4 tanks engaged, 2 burned outright, 2 stopped cold. 20 American soldiers, still very much alive, already loading their trucks to evacuate, while the surviving German infantry remained too scattered and disorganized to stop them. Carpenter's own aircraft had roughly 60 seconds of engine life left and 3 miles of distance still between him and any runway. The Continental gave out completely, 2 miles out, and the Grasshopper became, in an instant, a very poor glider, torn fabric, damaged control surfaces, a weight distribution never designed for unpowered flight. He trimmed for best glide speed and watched the altitude bleed away faster than the runway could close the distance, judged correctly that he wouldn't make the strip, and aimed instead for a plowed field short of it. The aircraft touched down, the soft earth grabbed the wheels, and the Grasshopper flipped forward onto its back, propeller buried in mud. Carpenter hanging upside down in his harness, with fuel already leaking from a ruptured tank onto his own flight suit. He had seconds before the heat of the engine found that leaking fuel. He released the harness, dropped onto what was now the cockpit's inverted roof, kicked at a door jammed shut by the impact until the frame gave way, and crawled out through the gap, rolling clear and running 20 yards before his legs simply stopped holding him up. Ground crew reached him less than a minute later and sprayed foam across the wreck before it could ignite. Carpenter walked away with bruises across his chest from the harness, and nothing worse. 3 sorties, 18 rockets fired, 4 Panthers stopped, 2 of them burned outright, 20 Americans alive who otherwise likely wouldn't have been, 1 aircraft, total loss. He had a new L-4 within 3 days, same modifications, same name painted on the cowling. Between that September and the following December, he flew 63 more bazooka sorties, officially credited with 6 tanks destroyed and roughly 17 armored vehicles disabled. Ground crews who watched some of his more distant attacks believed the real number ran considerably higher, impossible to confirm cleanly, when Carpenter was often attacking targets miles beyond where anyone could walk out afterward to verify a kill. German doctrine changed because of him specifically. Before Arracourt, nobody bothered shooting at a Piper Cub. After it, standing orders required every ground unit to engage any L-4 on sight, and Panther and Tiger crews started posting dedicated spotters just to watch the sky for a small yellow airplane with tubes on its wings. The Germans had their own name for him, the Mad Major. By early 1945, with Third Army pushed to the German border, and Carpenter passed 100 combat sorties without a single wound, despite being shot at on nearly every one of them, Army doctors diagnosed Hodgkin's disease, lymphoma, terminal by the medical understanding of the era, given at most 2 years to live. He was 32 years old, had survived 110 missions in an unarmed observation plane turned improvised tank killer, and cancer was about to accomplish what no German gun crew ever had. He didn't get 2 years, he got 21. Discharged in 1946 with a Silver Star, a Bronze Star with oak leaf cluster, and credit for 6 confirmed tanks destroyed. Carpenter went home to Illinois and went back to teaching history at Urbana High School, watching his own 2-year prognosis quietly expand past 5 years, then 10, then 15. Medical science of the 1940s, simply not understanding yet how unevenly Hodgkin's disease actually progressed in every patient. He taught for 2 full decades after doctors told him he'd be dead. He died on March 22, 1966, at 53, 19 years past what he'd been told to expect, having outlasted the disease with roughly the same stubbornness he'd once used to outlast German anti-aircraft fire. His original Grasshopper vanished into post-war surplus, sold off, repainted, flown for decades by a civilian flying club in Austria, with nobody aware of what it had once done. Aviation historians finally identified it in 2017, sitting disassembled in a museum storeroom at Graz. It was purchased, shipped back to the United States, and fully restored. The same aircraft that had dove on German Panthers outside Arracourt, flying again under its own name, more than 7 decades later. The Bazooka armed Cub never became standard doctrine. It was too fragile, too dependent on one pilot's willingness to fly a fabric airplane directly into anti-aircraft fire, and the concept died with the war rather than surviving it. But for a handful of months in 1944, when American tank crews were burning against armor they couldn't match, a history teacher from Illinois strapped bazookas to a 65-horsepower observation plane because, in his own words to a reporter that October, the war needed fighting 60 minutes an hour and 24 hours a day. Attack and attack again. If this story moved you the way it moved us, hit that like button. Everyone tells YouTube to put this story in front of more people. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing stories like this one out of the archive every single week. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And if anyone in your family served, we want to hear it. Thanks for watching, and thanks for making sure Charles Carpenter doesn't disappear into silence.